What's the worst thing you opened your phone to? My ex Sawyer had posted a photo of a knife pressed against his wrist with the caption, "If she doesn't talk to me by midnight, this is how it ends." Every single person I knew was texting me at once, all texting me the link. My hands were shaking as I opened Twitter and saw the picture of him. The whole thing started because I finally dumped Sawyer 2 weeks earlier. I caught him making out with Sarah from the volleyball team in his car after he swore he was at his cousin's birthday party. This was the 5th time I'd caught him lying about something big. He lied about everything from where he was, to who he was with, to whether he'd even graduated middle school with honors like he claimed. I was done being the stupid girlfriend who believed everything. But Sawyer couldn't handle being dumped. He showed up at my house at 2 a.m., throwing rocks at my window. He left 47 voicemails crying and then screaming and then crying again. He followed me around school trying to explain that Sarah meant nothing and that I was overreacting. When none of that worked, he started telling people I was the one who cheated. Then he said I was crazy and needed help. Then he told everyone I was failing all my classes and he'd been doing my homework. The sewer slide threat was his nuclear option. He tagged me in the post and told all our mutual friends to message me. He said if I didn't respond to him by midnight, he would end himself, and it would be my fault. The messages started flooding in immediately. People I hadn't talked to since freshman year were begging me to just talk to him. My best friend Steph said I should at least hear him out. Even teachers were pulling me aside asking if everything was okay at home. I spent the whole day feeling sick. Kids were whispering about me in the hallways and pointing at me in the cafeteria. Someone had screenshotted Sawyer's post and shared it in the school group chat, so literally everyone knew. Girls who didn't even like me were coming up saying I needed to do the right thing. The pressure was crushing me from every direction, but I held firm. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. By the time midnight came and went, I was exhausted but proud of myself for not caving. I figured Sawyer would show up to school the next day acting like nothing happened, because that's what manipulators do. They make threats they never follow through on just to control you. I went to bed thinking the worst was over and tomorrow everyone would see I was right to ignore him. But Sawyer didn't come to school the next day. Or the day after that. By Wednesday, people were getting worried. His best friend Tyler cornered me at my locker asking if I'd heard from him. Sawyer's car was gone from his house and his parents were freaking out. His mom had called the police and reported him missing. The knife from the photo was missing from their kitchen too. The mood at school shifted completely. Everyone who had supported me for standing up to manipulation was now looking at me like I had blood on my hands. Teachers stopped making eye contact with me in the halls. My friends started distancing themselves because they didn't know what to say. The whispers went from good for her to she should have just talked to him. Thursday morning was when Sawyer's mom showed up. She was waiting for me in the parking lot with red eyes and messy hair like she hadn't slept in days. She grabbed my arms and shook me asking where her son was. She said I was the last person he tried to contact, and I had to know something. Security had to pull her off me while she screamed that if anything happened to Sawyer, it was my fault. The police questioned me that afternoon. They wanted to know about our relationship and the breakup and the sewer slide threat. They asked if Sawyer had any favorite places he might go or friends he might stay with. They took my phone to check our messages. The detective kept asking if I was sure I hadn't heard from him since the Twitter post. The way she looked at me made it clear she thought I was hiding something. By Friday, the whole town was looking for Sawyer. His picture was on every telephone pole and social media feed. Search parties were organized to check the woods behind the school. Divers were brought in to search the lake where we used to go on dates. His mom did an interview with the local news begging him to come home and begging me to tell her where he was. People started leaving nasty notes in my locker. Someone spray-painted murderer on my car. Steph stopped sitting with me at lunch because she said it was too uncomfortable. Even my parents were looking at me differently like they weren't sure what to believe. My mom kept asking if I was absolutely certain I did the right thing by ignoring his threat. Saturday morning, I woke up to sirens. Lots of them. I ran to my window and saw police cars racing down my street toward the old industrial district. My heart was pounding as I checked my phone and saw dozens of messages about something being found in an abandoned warehouse. Everyone was saying it was connected to Sawyer, but nobody knew exactly what it was. I threw on clothes and drove toward the sirens along with what felt like half the town. Police had the whole area blocked off, but I could see ambulances and crime scene tape. Sawyer's parents were there and his mom was sobbing hysterically while his dad held her. People were crying and hugging each other. My stomach dropped as I realized they must have found a body. But then I saw something that made me cry. Behind the yellow tape near one of the ambulances, I caught a glimpse of someone on a stretcher, and they were staring right at me. It was Sawyer and his eyes locked onto mine with this weird look that made my stomach turn completely inside out. He was pale and looked smaller on that stretcher, but his stare had this mix of victory and desperation that scared me. The paramedics were checking his vitals while he kept his head turned toward me, even as they tried to get him to look forward. His lips moved like he was trying to say something, but I couldn't hear over all the noise and commotion around us. My legs felt stuck to the ground as I watched them load him into the ambulance and his eyes never left mine. The police started pushing everyone back and telling us to clear the area while the ambulance doors began closing. I heard people around me talking about how he was awake and talking when they found him in that warehouse. Someone behind me said he had camping supplies and water bottles like he'd been planning to stay there for days. The idea that he'd staged this whole thing with supplies made my skin crawl, and my hands start shaking again. An officer I recognized from Thursday's questioning walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. She asked if I could come to the station for a follow-up statement about what I'd seen this morning. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was watching my face for any reaction to seeing Sawyer alive. I nodded and texted my parents who were already on their way after seeing the news alerts. They pulled up within minutes, and my dad's face was tight with worry while my mom just looked exhausted. The drive to the station was mostly quiet, except for my mom asking short questions about what I saw at the warehouse. She wanted to know if Sawyer looked hurt, and if he'd said anything to me, and if the police told me anything specific. The tension in the car was so thick I could barely breathe, and I knew they were both thinking the same thing. They were wondering if I should have just answered his messages, and maybe none of this would have happened at all. At the station, Detective Lysandra Frey was waiting for us in the same room where she'd questioned me on Thursday. She had a notebook and recorder ready and asked me to go through everything from the Twitter post to this morning. Her questions were specific about times and dates and who contacted me and when I last heard from Sawyer directly. She wrote down every detail I gave her and asked follow-up questions about things that didn't seem important to me. I could feel her trying to figure out if I knew more than I was saying about where he'd been hiding. She asked if Sawyer had any special places we used to go, or if he'd ever mentioned that warehouse before. After an hour of questions, she thanked me for my cooperation and said they'd be in touch if they needed anything else. Walking out of the station, my phone started buzzing with notifications, and I saw a news alert pop up immediately. Someone had already posted that I'd shown up at the warehouse scene, and the comments were calling me heartless and cold. People were saying I went there to gloat and that I wanted to see him suffer after ignoring his cry for help. Detective Frey came back out holding my phone in an evidence bag and handed it to me with specific instructions. She told me not to delete any messages or posts, and to forward anything new from Sawyer or about the situation immediately. Her tone made it clear these weren't suggestions, but orders I needed to follow for the investigation. That evening, while trying to eat dinner, my phone dinged with an email notification from the school administration office. The message said I was required to attend mandatory counseling sessions with Antonia Collins starting Monday morning before classes. The formal language and lack of any option to decline made it clear this wasn't a request, but an order. 20 minutes later, a Facebook message came through from someone named Gibson Murdoch who said he was a reporter with the local paper. He asked if I wanted to give my side of the story and said he was writing an article about teen mental health. I typed back that I didn't want to comment, but I knew he was going to write something with or without my input. Before bed, I checked Instagram and saw Tyler had posted a story about fake friends who don't care about real mental health issues. He didn't use my name, but the timing and the comments flooding in made it obvious who he meant. People were replying with broken heart emojis and saying some people only care about themselves and have no empathy at all. The likes and shares were piling up fast, and I watched the view count climb past 200 in just minutes. My hands were shaking as I set my phone down and tried to process everything that had happened since this morning. I grabbed my laptop and started making a folder on my desktop labeled documentation, because organizing felt like the only thing I could control right now. I went through my phone, pulling up all 47 of Sawyer's old voicemails, and started saving them one by one to the folder. The crying ones, the screaming ones, the ones where he called me horrible names and then said he loved me in the same message. Then I found the screenshot of his knife post that someone had sent me, and saved that too, along with all the timestamps showing when he'd posted it. My fingers moved fast across the keyboard as I created subfolders for different types of evidence like voice messages and social media posts and text conversations. My mom knocked on my door and came in without waiting for an answer, which she never does. She sat on my bed and said we needed to talk about keeping me safe, and that meant I couldn't go anywhere alone for a while. Dad came in behind her holding my car keys and said he was taking them for the night just to be sure. They meant well, but it felt like I was the one being punished when Sawyer was the one who'd pulled this whole stunt. Mom said she'd drive me to the school Monday and pick me up, and that I needed to text them every hour when I wasn't home. I nodded because arguing would just make them more worried, but inside I felt trapped, like I was under house arrest for not giving in to manipulation. My phone buzzed and I saw Steph's name pop up for the first time since Friday. She asked if I was okay, which made my chest tight with hope until I read the rest where she said she couldn't sit with me at lunch Monday because it was too much drama. The way she typed it all casual, like she was canceling plans to go shopping instead of abandoning me when I needed friends most, made my eyes burn. I typed back that I understood even though I didn't, and watched the read receipt pop up with no reply. Then a notification came through from an account with no profile picture and a bunch of random numbers for a username. The message had a screenshot attached, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped, because it was from a group chat dated 2 days before Sawyer's knife post. In the chat, Sawyer was laughing with some guys about how he was going to make me talk to him, and someone had replied with laughing emojis saying she'll come running when she sees it. My hands shook as I realized this could prove he'd planned the whole thing as manipulation, and wasn't actually in danger. I immediately forwarded the screenshot to Detective Frey's email that she'd given me at the station, with a message explaining what it was and when I'd received it. Her reply came back within minutes, just saying received and logged with no thank you or good job or anything warm at all. The formal cold response made me feel even more alone, like I was just evidence in a case instead of a person going through something awful. That night I barely slept and kept checking my phone for updates about Sawyer, even though I knew the hospital wouldn't release information to the public. Sunday morning my dad was making breakfast when his phone rang, and I heard him say, "Oh, thank God," before looking at me with this complicated expression. He told me Sawyer was stable and talking to doctors at the hospital, which should have been pure relief, but instead I felt scared about what he might be telling them about me. I went back to my room and opened the screenshot from the anonymous account again to study every detail. The handles were all blurred out except for Sawyer's, but the timestamp was clear, showing 11:47 p.m. on Thursday, 2 days before he posted the knife photo. I started typing out exactly what the messages said word for word in a document because I wanted to have everything recorded in case the image got deleted somehow. Sawyer had written, "Gonna make her talk tomorrow, watch this," and someone replied, "Bet she comes crawling back," and another person said, "Nah, she's too stubborn, bro." Then Sawyer wrote, "Trust me, I know what buttons to push," and everyone sent laughing emojis like it was all a big joke. Monday came too fast and my mom drove me to the school like she'd promised while I stared out the window dreading what was waiting for me. Walking through the main doors, I kept my head down and went straight to my locker trying to ignore the whispers that followed me down the hall. That's when Pung from my computer science class came up to me, which was weird because we'd never really talked outside of group projects. He said he'd heard about everything and wanted to help by checking the metadata on Sawyer's knife photo to prove when and where it was really taken. His offer caught me off guard, but I gave him my email so he could send me instructions on how to forward him the image file properly. During lunch, I sat alone at a corner table and saw someone filming me on their phone from across the cafeteria. Later, I found out they'd posted a video of me walking through the hallway with everyone staring and whispering with some mean caption about how I didn't even care. I never watched it because setting boundaries felt like the only power I had left in this whole mess. After school, my mom picked me up and drove me straight to my appointment with Antonia Collins, the counselor they'd assigned me. She had this calm way of talking that made me feel less crazy as we went through everything that had happened since the breakup. We made a safety plan together that included coping strategies for when I felt overwhelmed and tips for documenting any harassment or threats. She was the first adult who actually said I did the right thing by not responding to Sawyer's manipulation, and it made me want to cry with relief. The next morning, Detective Frey shows up at our house to interview my parents with me sitting right there on the living room couch. She pulls out her notebook and starts asking about my curfew the night Sawyer went missing and whether I was home all evening. My mom confirms I was in my room by 9, and my dad says he checked on me at 11 when he went to bed. The detective writes everything down and asks if I left the house at any point that night, or if anyone came over. Both my parents say no, and I can feel them looking at me sideways like they're seeing me differently now. Detective Frey asks about my phone usage and whether I have any tracking apps that could verify my location. My mom mentions the family location sharing we have set up and shows the detective her phone with the history from that night. The questions keep coming about who I talked to and what websites I visited, and whether I have any social media accounts they don't know about. After she leaves, I go straight to my room and pull out a notebook to write down everything that's happened since the breakup. I start with catching Sawyer with Sarah in his car 2 weeks ago, and write every single detail I can remember. The rocks at my window and the 47 voicemails and him following me around school all go on the paper. I write about the lies he told everyone and the knife photo and how everyone pressured me to respond. Seeing it all written out in order makes it so clear how he kept pushing harder each time I didn't react. The pattern jumps off the page, showing how calculated everything was from the start. Tuesday at the school, I'm washing my hands in the bathroom when Sarah walks in and locks the door behind her. She looks nervous and says she needs to tell me something about Sawyer that's been eating at her. She admits he told her we were already broken up when they started hanging out and that I was seeing someone else. He said I was just staying with him for his car and that our relationship was basically over anyway. She pulls out her phone and shows me screenshots of their messages where he's saying completely different things about me. In one message he calls me controlling, and in another he says I'm too clingy, and in another he says I don't care about him at all. She scrolls through more messages where he's telling her about fights we never had and problems that didn't exist. Then she shows me a document she typed up with all his lies listed out with dates and what really happened. She's blacked out some names to protect other people, but the evidence is all there showing how he played both of us. She says she's been working on this since Saturday when she realized what he'd done to both of us. That afternoon, I check my phone and see an article by Gibson Murdoch with my picture right at the top. The headline says something about ignoring cries for help, and the whole thing makes me look terrible. He uses quotes from random students who barely know me and leaves out huge chunks of the timeline. The article makes it sound like I just coldly ignored Sawyer without any history of manipulation or lies. My hands are shaking as I type out an email to Gibson with the actual facts and timeline corrections. I explain about the pattern of manipulation and the 47 voicemails and everything else he left out. He writes back within an hour with just, "Thanks for reaching out," and nothing else. I refresh the article page over and over, but he never updates it with my corrections. Wednesday after school, I'm walking to my car when Tyler comes up behind me looking uncomfortable. He glances around to make sure no one's watching and quietly says he needs to tell me something. He admits he didn't think Sawyer was serious about the threat either, and actually laughed when he first saw the photo. But then he says he can't say that publicly, because Sawyer's his best friend, and everyone would turn on him. He walks away quickly before anyone sees us talking, and I'm left standing there feeling both validated and frustrated. That night, I'm going through old bank statements for a school project when I notice something weird. The day before Sawyer posted the knife photo, there's a charge at Party Palace for $37. I pull up their website and see they sell all kinds of props and fake weapons for Halloween and theater stuff. My stomach turns as I realize what this might mean about his whole plan. Tuesday morning, I wake up early and go outside to get the newspaper from my dad. There's a crumpled piece of paper on our doorstep with messy handwriting that says, "Talk to him or else," with no signature. I immediately take a photo of it with my phone and pick it up carefully by the corner. Our neighbors are getting in their cars for work, and they all avoid looking at me like I'm invisible. I go back inside and show my parents the note, and my mom calls the police right away. Detective Frey calls me that afternoon while I'm doing homework and mentions they found more at the warehouse. She says there was a sleeping bag and several water bottles and enough food for multiple days. The warehouse also had a portable phone charger and some books which suggest Sawyer planned to stay there a while. She tells me this information might be important for understanding his state of mind, but the way she says it makes everything feel even more calculated and creepy. The next morning, I walked straight into the main office with the folder of evidence I'd been collecting. The secretary looked up from her computer and asked if I needed a late pass, but I shook my head and asked to see the principal about filing a harassment report. She picked up the phone and talked quietly for a minute before pointing me toward the conference room where the principal and vice principal were already waiting. I spread out all my documentation on the table, including the 47 voicemails and screenshots of the knife post and the note someone left on our doorstep. They looked through everything while I explained the timeline starting from the breakup 2 weeks ago, through the warehouse discovery and all the threats since then. The principal took notes and asked specific questions about dates and witnesses, while the vice principal made copies of everything for their files. My hands were shaking as I signed the official complaint form, but it felt good to finally take real action instead of just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. They said they'd investigate immediately and contact Sawyer's parents about keeping him away from the school property once he was released from the hospital. 2 days later, the school held a mandatory assembly in the gym about mental health and recognizing warning signs in friends. The counselor talked about resources and hotlines while carefully avoiding any specific names or recent events, but everyone knew exactly what this was about. Kids kept turning around to look at me sitting in the bleachers with my hood up trying to be invisible. The weight of being the unnamed center of attention made my chest tight, and I had to focus on breathing normally while the presentation dragged on. Teachers stood along the walls watching students more than the speaker, and I caught several of them glancing at me with these worried expressions. When they finally dismissed us, I tried to leave quickly, but got stuck in the crowd shuffling toward the exits while whispers followed me down the hallway. That afternoon, Gibson was waiting outside school with his phone already recording as students poured out of the building. I saw him too late to change direction and kept walking toward my car with my head down and backpack pulled tight against my shoulders. He followed me across the parking lot asking loudly if I had any comment about the assembly or Sawyer's condition, but I just kept walking without responding. My face stayed blank even though inside I wanted to scream at him to leave me alone. Later that night, I saw the video he posted online with a caption about me refusing to show concern for a struggling classmate. He'd edited it to make my tired shuffle look dismissive and cold, when really I was just exhausted from everything. The comments under his post called me heartless and said I was making everything worse by not cooperating with the media. Wednesday morning, my parents drove me to the hospital for a supervised meeting that Detective Frey had arranged. We sat in a small conference room that smelled like disinfectant while we waited for everyone to arrive. Sawyer's parents came in first, and his mom's eyes were red and puffy, like she hadn't stopped crying in days. Then a nurse wheeled Sawyer in wearing a hospital gown with bandages on his wrists. He looked pale and smaller somehow, but his eyes still had that intense look when they locked onto mine. Detective Frey sat at the head of the table with a notepad and explained the ground rules about keeping things civil and productive. Sawyer's dad asked me to explain my side of everything, so I took a deep breath and started talking. I told them about the pattern of lies and manipulation, and the 47 voicemails, and how he'd followed me around school after the breakup. My voice shook at first, but got steadier as I explained why I couldn't respond to threats without making things worse. Sawyer kept trying to interrupt, but Detective Frey would hold up her hand and remind him to wait his turn. When I finished, his mom was crying harder and his dad just stared at the table looking tired. Sawyer insisted everything was a misunderstanding, and that he never meant to hurt anyone, but Detective Frey took notes without commenting on who she believed. After the meeting ended, a nurse handed me a folder with Sawyer's clinical summary that the detective said I could have for my records. Back in the car, I read through the medical terms and saw he had superficial cuts that required minimal treatment and signs of dehydration from hiding in the warehouse. The report noted he was being held for psychiatric evaluation and would need approval from multiple doctors before being released. Having the medical facts written out so plainly made everything feel less like an emotional disaster and more like a documented case. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that turned out to be Sawyer's mom. She wrote that she wasn't ready to apologize but needed to understand what led to all this. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back a careful response with just basic facts about the breakup and the harassment afterward. I didn't mention Sarah or the cheating because that would just hurt her more, and I kept my answers short and factual without getting into how I felt about everything. She thanked me and said she needed time to process everything, which I understood completely. Friday after school, Steph texted asking if I wanted to meet at the coffee shop near the mall instead of our usual place by school. I drove over and found her already waiting in a back corner booth away from the windows. She explained that she still cared about me but needed some distance from all the drama because it was affecting her mental health too. I nodded and said I understood, even though it hurt to hear my best friend basically admitting she couldn't fully support me. We talked for an hour about normal stuff like homework and TV shows while carefully avoiding any mention of Sawyer or the situation. When we left, she hugged me quickly and said maybe we could do this once a week, which was better than nothing, but still felt really lonely. Monday morning, Peng found me in the library and pulled out his laptop to show me something he'd discovered about the knife photo. He'd analyzed the metadata and found that the timestamp showed it was taken 3 hours before it was posted, which meant Sawyer had scheduled the upload. The photo was also geotagged at a location in town, not at the warehouse, which suggested even more planning behind his threat. Peng printed out his analysis with all the technical details highlighted and said I should give it to Detective Frey immediately. I thanked him and felt grateful that at least one person was actively trying to help me prove what really happened. That afternoon, I brought Peng's findings to Detective Frey at the station, and she looked them over carefully while asking questions about how the analysis worked. She said the information was definitely helpful context, but explained it wasn't enough for legal proof of manipulation, since scheduling posts wasn't illegal. I felt my hope deflate as she explained that intent was really hard to prove in court, even with technical evidence. She kept the printouts for her file but warned me not to expect too much from the investigation. Thursday night, I was doing homework when my phone lit up with notifications about a new post from Sawyer's account. He'd shared a photo of himself in a hospital bed with a long caption thanking his real friends for their support during his recovery. He promised to share his truth soon, and said he was getting the help he needed to become a better person. The comments were full of hearts and support from people saying they were proud of him for being so brave. My stomach turned cold knowing this was just the beginning of his next manipulation campaign. Thursday morning, I met Antonia in her office before first period, and we spread all my evidence across her desk, including the voicemails and screenshots and the metadata analysis Peng had done. She pulled out a thick packet of forms for the restraining order application and walked me through each section while I filled in dates and specific incidents. My hands were steady, but my stomach was turning as I wrote down every single thing Sawyer had done since the breakup. The rock throwing and the 47 voicemails and the lies he spread at the school all looked so much worse written down in black and white. Antonia photocopied everything 3 times and put one set in a folder for me and one for herself and one to file with the court. She called the courthouse right there in front of me and scheduled an appointment for us to submit the paperwork that afternoon. At lunch, I was heading to the library when Tyler stepped right in front of me, blocking my path. He started saying something about how taking Sawyer to court was going too far and how I was ruining his life over a misunderstanding. I looked him straight in the eye for about 2 seconds, then stepped around him and kept walking toward the library without saying a single word. He called after me, but I just kept walking, and it felt like the first time I'd handled one of Sawyer's friends without getting dragged into an argument. My phone buzzed during 5th period with a notification from an anonymous Twitter account that had just posted audio of Sawyer from about a month ago. I listened with my earbuds in and heard him laughing with some guys about how gullible everyone in our town was and how he could get away with anything because people here were too nice to call him out. The account had tagged half the school, and the audio was already getting shared everywhere. Part of me felt vindicated that people were finally seeing who he really was, but I also knew this would just make everything more intense. That evening, the school board held their monthly forum, and they'd added a special segment about student safety and harassment after everything that had been happening. Antonia had encouraged me to speak, so I stood up when they called for comments and talked for maybe 3 minutes about harassment and documentation, and the importance of taking threats seriously. I stuck to facts only and never said Sawyer's name, even though everyone knew exactly what I was talking about. My voice shook a little at the beginning, but by the end I was speaking clearly, and several parents nodded along. After I sat down, my phone lit up with a DM from Sarah. She'd sent me screenshots of messages from when Sawyer and I were still together, where he was pressuring her for photos and telling her I was boring, and that she was so much prettier. The messages went back months before he actually cheated with her, and showed him lying to both of us the whole time. Sarah wrote that she felt terrible and wanted me to have these for evidence if I needed them. Looking at the timestamps made me realize he'd been working on her for ages while telling me he loved me every day. I forwarded everything to Detective Frey's email with a note explaining that Sarah had requested to stay anonymous but wanted to help with evidence. Detective Frey replied within an hour saying she'd add it to the file and would protect Sarah's identity in her reports. Gibson posted another article that night with the headline still making it sound like I'd driven Sawyer to desperation, but at least this time he mentioned the restraining order filing in the 3rd paragraph. He'd clearly been at the school board meeting because he quoted part of what I'd said about documentation. The comments were still mostly awful, but a few people were starting to question Sawyer's story. Thursday morning, Detective Frey called to tell me the warehouse owner had decided to press trespassing charges against Sawyer completely separate from anything involving me. Apparently Sawyer had broken a lock to get in and had been there before based on security footage from weeks earlier. She said this meant he'd face consequences regardless of what happened with my restraining order, which made me feel a tiny bit less alone in all this. Friday afternoon, Antonia and I went to the courthouse for the official filing, and the clerk told us the hearing date was set for the following Friday. Back at the school, Antonia had me practice my testimony over and over in her office. She'd ask me questions like the judge might, and I'd answer with just the facts while keeping my voice steady. We went through the timeline probably 6 times until I could recite everything without getting emotional or losing track of dates. My nerves were completely shot, but having the practice helped me feel more prepared than I'd been for anything else in this whole mess. After school, I found Peng in the computer lab and asked if he could help me lock down all my social media. I was done with Twitter completely, and deleted my whole account right there while he watched to make sure I did it right. Then we went through Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, changing all my settings to maximum privacy and blocking anyone connected to Sawyer. Peng showed me how to download my data first in case I needed it for evidence, and helped me set up 2-factor authentication on everything. The whole process took almost 2 hours, but when we finished, I felt like I'd put up a wall between me and all the harassment. Saturday passed in a blur of trying to act normal while checking my phone every few minutes for updates. Sunday morning, my dad drove me to get groceries just to keep me busy and out of the house. We didn't talk much, but having him there helped more than I expected. That afternoon, I worked on homework in my room trying to focus on anything besides tomorrow's hearing. Around 9 that night, I went downstairs to get water and noticed something white stuck under our front door. My stomach tightened as I pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. The handwriting was messy, but I recognized it immediately. "We should talk before tomorrow," was all it said, but I knew it was from Sawyer. My hands shook as I took photos of the note from every angle. I called the police non-emergency line and explained what I'd found. The dispatcher said an officer would come by to collect it as evidence. My parents waited with me until the officer arrived 20 minutes later. She bagged the note and took my statement about finding it. She said Detective Frey would get a copy before court tomorrow. I barely slept that night thinking about what Sawyer might try at the hearing. Monday morning came too fast, and suddenly we were at the courthouse. Antonia met us in the lobby and walked me through what would happen. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with just a few rows of seats. Sawyer was already there with his parents and a lawyer. He stared at me when I walked in, but I kept my eyes forward. The judge called the case and asked me to come to the witness stand. My voice shook at first, but got steadier as I explained the timeline from the breakup to finding the note last night. I showed the photos on my phone of his original threat, and described the voicemails and the rock throwing. Detective Frey testified next about their investigation, and confirmed receiving the note from last night. She explained how Sawyer had been found in the warehouse with supplies suggesting he'd planned to stay there. The judge asked Sawyer's lawyer if they had any questions, but they just said their client wasn't contesting the order. After maybe 30 minutes of testimony, the judge said she was granting a 6-month restraining order. Sawyer couldn't contact me directly or through other people. He had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my house, and anywhere I worked. The relief hit me so hard I almost started crying right there. Sawyer and his parents left first while we waited inside for them to clear out. Back at the school Tuesday, the reactions were all over the place. Some kids nodded at me in the halls like they finally understood. Others still whispered and pointed like I was the bad guy. The harassment definitely dropped off, though. Nobody left nasty notes in my locker anymore. People stopped bumping into me on purpose in the hallways. It wasn't perfect, but the pressure felt lighter. Gibson posted a new article Wednesday that actually mentioned mental health resources and manipulation tactics. The headline still made it sound dramatic, but at least the actual article was more balanced. The comment section was still pretty awful, but a few people were defending me now. Some were sharing their own stories about toxic relationships. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. All it said was, "I'm sorry," with no explanation or follow-up. I read it 3 times, then deleted the whole conversation thread. That chapter of my life was closed, and I didn't need to respond. Friday after school, I drove out to the lake by myself for the first time since everything started. The parking lot was empty, and I sat on the hood of my car watching the water. No panic attacks came. No overwhelming memories crashed over me. I just sat there breathing normally and watching ducks swim around. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought was gone. When I got home, my parents were waiting in the living room. They said they wanted to talk about everything that had happened. My mom admitted she'd doubted my decision at first, but now understood why I couldn't give in to manipulation. My dad said he was proud of how I'd handled the legal stuff. We set up new rules about checking in when I went places and keeping doors locked. Having them fully on my side made everything feel more manageable. The next Monday, I started therapy with someone Antonia had recommended across town. The therapist's office was in a quiet building where nobody from the school would see me. We spent the first session just talking about what happened without any judgment. She gave me exercises for managing anxiety when memories came up. Committing to weekly sessions felt like taking control of my recovery. Tuesday after school, Peng met me in the computer lab again to finish the privacy stuff. He showed me how to save screenshots and messages in a way that would preserve them as evidence. We created a special folder system with dates and descriptions for everything. He taught me how to export chat logs and save them in multiple formats. Having an organized system for documenting any future harassment made me feel way more prepared. He even showed me apps that could record calls automatically if Sawyer tried contacting me through blocked numbers. Wednesday morning, Detective Frey called me while I was getting ready for school and told me Sarah had come forward with her own statement about Sawyer's behavior. She wouldn't give me details, but said it backed up everything I'd been saying about the harassment and that Sarah wanted to remain anonymous, which I totally understood. The detective also mentioned the trespassing charges from the warehouse owner were moving forward, and Sawyer would probably get community service plus mandatory counseling for at least 6 months. When I got to the school that day, the counselor Antonia pulled me into her office and showed me my new schedule that moved me out of the classes where Tyler and Sawyer's other friends were. She'd worked it out so I had different lunch periods and could use the back entrance by the gym instead of the main doors where everyone hung out. The changes helped immediately because I could actually focus on my work without feeling watched all the time. That Friday, Steph caught up with me after last period and asked if we could get coffee sometime. She looked nervous and kept playing with her hair while she talked, but she said she missed me and wanted to try being friends again even if things were different. We agreed to meet once a week for lunch in the library where it was quiet and nobody would bother us. The next 2 weeks, I threw myself into studying for finals and blocked out everything else. My parents gave me space to focus, and I spent hours at the kitchen table with my textbooks and notes spread everywhere. When grades came out, I'd managed to keep my B average despite missing so many classes during the worst of everything. My mom cried when she saw my report card, and my dad made my favorite dinner to celebrate. School ended and summer started with this weird mix of relief and uncertainty about what came next. In early June, I got an email from some community mental health organization, inviting me to speak on a panel about toxic relationships and manipulation. They'd heard about my situation somehow and thought my story could help other teenagers. I stared at the invitation for 3 days before writing back that I appreciated the offer, but wasn't ready to talk publicly yet, though I'd be interested in attending as an audience member to learn from others. They understood and sent me the details for the event which I went to, and sat in the back row taking notes. Mid-June, I started looking for a summer job to keep busy, and found a position at this small bookstore downtown, where nobody from the school ever went. The owner was this older lady who didn't know anything about the drama, and just needed someone to work the register and stock shelves. My coworkers were mostly college kids home for summer, who treated me like any other teenager working a first job. Nobody whispered about me or gave me weird looks, and customers just wanted book recommendations or help finding the right section. The normal interactions felt amazing after months of being stared at everywhere I went. In July, I decided to write everything down in a journal with all the dates and screenshots and texts organized chronologically. I spent a whole weekend putting it together with sticky notes marking important parts and my feelings written in the margins. When I finished, I had this thick notebook documenting everything from the first lie I caught Sawyer in to the restraining order hearing. I read through it once, then put it in a box under my bed because having it all written down gave me the closure I needed without having to think about it every day. August came with its usual heat and back-to-school prep. I was walking downtown to pick up supplies when I saw Sawyer coming toward me on the sidewalk. My whole body tensed, but I kept walking straight ahead. He saw me too, and his face went red, but he looked down at his phone and crossed to the other side of the street. We passed each other without any drama or confrontation, and I made it another block before realizing I'd been holding my breath the whole time. The fact that we could exist in the same space without everything exploding felt like proof that we'd both moved forward, even if we'd never be okay with each other. Thanks for letting me wonder through all this with you. Definitely been quite a journey to share together. Really appreciate you being here. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.